All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddha. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly will I establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. I mentioned that I might at some point say a few words about some of the other opening prayers. So I want to do that briefly before we move to the recitation of our text. I spoke yesterday or the day before or last week or last month when we first came together, this endless retreat, about the first one, the altruistic motivation, and how in this lineage only, as far as I'm aware, the dedication of all our Bodhisattva efforts to the liberation of beings is first of all to those who oppose us, right? Which is in itself the whole practice, is it not? Right? So each of these prayers contains the whole Dharma. The Dharma is holographic in that way. That's the way I think of it. It's like a hologram. Each syllable practically contains the entire Dharma. And so it's why we have teachers. You know, if you give a great teacher like Garchen Rinpoche one word of the Dharma, the whole thing will unpack from there. Choose carefully the one word that you use in that way for your symbol, you know, for what it is. For me, it's love. That word is the whole Dharma. So I try to unpack that as time goes by, increasingly unpack that meaning in my life and my expression and my understanding. And it does it for me. Love all and everything. I think that's the essence of all the true paths, don't you think so? I mean, where they all come back to that. And even our quotidian worldly paths. You know, when someone dies, the highest accolade given for someone who's just died is never from West Virginia. I use some reference like that maybe are not quite as familiar to you. But that can be said of almost anyone who's been clearly seen by those who love him or her. And it's extraordinary to hear it said sometimes about somebody who's been crotchety and kind of cranky, and that person always was so kind to the children in the neighborhood, or that person was so loving, rescued the bugs from the water. Do you know? I mean, just people remember that as the signal element that they're recalling at the time that they're saying, yes, this person's gone. You know, it's not the injunction not to speak ill of the dead. It's the invitation to remember what rests in your heart about that person. Now, there's some people you wouldn't say that about, but that's a fault in our vision. Right. So this second prayer is wonderful. It's called the Action Bodhicitta prayer, yes? So what I love about this prayer is the total dedication. You know, body, speech, and mind, from now until all beings attain enlightenment. But note the gradation of difficulty and commitment required. The first line, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Well, that's quite vast. It's really easy to make that commitment, isn't it? From now until enlightenment, I will perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. No effort required. I've just made that commitment. Wonderful. And then you get until death. Well, that's a little tighter frame. You think, can I really do that until death? I mean, that's an actual time commitment, more finite, more defined, and therefore more demanding of your commitment. And then we get down to, from now until this time tomorrow, now you're really on the spit turning. Yes? Now you really got to show up, because it's from now until this time tomorrow. So the increasing closeness to us is where we have to have traction, so that we're moving forward with the aspiration through commitment to actual engagement. So aspirations, like the first line, commitment's the second line, and engagement is the third line. That's where it becomes truly action bodhicitta, from now until this time tomorrow. Now, I certainly have experienced in the few years of this wonderful exposure to the Dharma, how I'll make a commitment, like I will do Tonglen, all day long for those beings who are suffering from flood or fire or whatever. I can make a commitment like that when I wake up. 20 minutes later, I may have entirely forgotten about it. Are you like that? Sometimes in the old Jewish way, they say, is there an honest man in the house? Are you like that? Do you forget also? Does it slip your mind, the commitment to love all beings and liberate all beings? Slips mine. Fortunately, there are adverse circumstances and challenging beings to remind you. And the third prayer, the short refuge prayer, the third line, by the merit of generosity and other good deeds, that's referring to the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfection practices that we're studying these 2 days. Yeah. And the last one, the 4 immeasurables, I consider this the essential Bodhisattva prayer. If you have no other actual formal prayer that rests in your heart and rings like a bell for you to remind you of what the entire commitment of path and right relationship is, this prayer would do it. This prayer would do it. This has been close to my heart for decades, many decades actually. When I turned 51, in the tradition I was in at that time, you become a grandparent for the community at that time. But I was in a kind of a bad mood when I turned 51, so I waited until I was 52 to create the ceremony for the community to take part in, to acknowledge my commitment to them. And I was at that time in the visual artist phase of my life, and I expect there was a large number of people coming. I made 125 small paintings, and on each of them this prayer was. And that was a practice. It's probably one of the deepest practice periods I've ever been in the ordinary world framework. Where an ordinary activity, what looked like an ordinary activity for a visual artist, but it was imbued with this. So I want to do something I rarely do anymore because I've lost my voice. It's kind of creaky now, that old lady voice that people get. So I'm getting that. But there's a beautiful tune to this in the Tibetan, and please forgive me, all you who are listening online. You might want to turn the volume way down, and those who are here together. It's just because I love you and I love this prayer, and here we are together, you and I in this prayer. So I want to give voice in the way that I have been doing for decades in the privacy of my little cave. So please forgive me. I mean, seriously, please forgive me. Moving this a little bit away, if you don't mind. I can't get any volume anymore. I used to be able to bellow, but I can't bellow anymore. But oh, perhaps I should have sympathy. Manam kadanyam pesam chentam chede wadang dewe judang den parjuchi duknal ji judang drawarjuchi Duknal me pede wadang min drawarjuchi Nyering chagdang yidang drawedang yomna me parjuchi. I mispronounced one syllable. It's okay. Mistakes are okay. We're on the path together. So now we're reciting our text. Did you have a copy, Todd? Good, okay. There's an old saying that if you want to know who the enlightened person is in the Sangha, go to the kitchen. The chef just came to join us. Namo Lokeshvaraya. While seeing that all phenomena neither come nor go, you strive solely for the sake of all beings. Supreme Guru and Protector Chenrezig, at all times I respectfully pay homage to you with body, speech, and mind. The perfect Buddha, source of all well-being and ultimate peace, arise from having accomplished the true Dharma, and since that depends on knowing the practices, I shall explain the way of the Bodhisattvas. Having now gained this great ship of freedom and fortune so difficult to find, in order to free yourself and others from the ocean of cyclic existence, listen, reflect, and meditate day and night without distraction. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Attachment to loved ones churns like water, hatred for enemies rages like fire. In the darkness of ignorance, one forgets what to adopt and what to avoid. Abandon your homeland. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When negative places are abandoned, disturbing emotions will gradually decline. Without distractions, attention to virtue naturally grows. When the mind becomes clear, certainty in the Dharma arises. Live alone in seclusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Family and longtime companions will part from each other. Possessions gained with effort will be left behind. Consciousness, a guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of all worldly concerns. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In bad company, the three poisons grow stronger. The activities of learning, reflecting, and meditating decline, and love and compassion are lost. Give up such companions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When one follows a true spiritual friend, faults will dissolve and good qualities will grow like a waxing moon. Consider this friend more dear than your own body. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Who can worldly gods, themselves imprisoned in samsara, protect? Therefore seek refuge in the three jewels, the undeceiving source of refuge. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The Buddha taught that all the unbearable suffering of the lower realms is caused by wrongdoing. Therefore never do wrong, even at the cost of your life. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Like a dewdrop on a blade of grass, the happiness of the three worlds vanishes in but an instant. Strive for the supreme state of never-changing liberation. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When mothers who've loved you since beginningless time are suffering, what good is your own happiness? Therefore give rise to bodhicitta in order to liberate infinite sentient beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering without exception comes from seeking your own happiness. The perfect Buddhas are born from the altruistic mind. Therefore truly exchange your own happiness for the suffering of others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone driven by great desire steals all your wealth or lets others steal it, dedicate to them your body, possessions, and all virtue of the three times. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone cuts off your head when you haven't done anything wrong, take all their negative deeds upon yourself through the power of compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if others slander you throughout a billion worlds, in return speak with a loving mind of their good qualities. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone exposes your hidden faults and insults you in front of others, view that person as a teacher and bow with respect. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone you've cared for as dearly as your own child regards you as an enemy, love that person even more as a mother would her ailing child. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even if someone of equal or lower status, driven by pride, treats you with disdain, respectfully place them on your crown as your teacher. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be impoverished, always disparaged, gripped by disease, and tormented by spirits, never lose courage, but take on the pain and misdeeds of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Though you may be famous and admired by many who bow to you, and as rich as the wealth god himself, having seen that worldly fortune is without essence, do not be proud. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If the enemy, your own anger, is not tamed, subduing outer enemies will only make them increase. Therefore subdue your own mind with the army of love and compassion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Sensory pleasures are like salt water. The more you drink, the greater your thirst. Abandon at once all things that bring forth clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. The way things appear is your own mind. Mind itself primordially transcends fabricated extremes. Knowing just this, do not create concepts of subject and object. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When you come across things that attract you like beautiful rainbows in summertime, do not regard them as real and abandon clinging attachment. This is the way of a bodhisattva. All suffering is like the death of your child in a dream. How exhausting it is to hold illusory appearances as real. Therefore, when you meet with difficult circumstances, see them as illusory. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When even one's body must be given up when aspiring for enlightenment, what need is there to mention material things? Therefore, practice generosity without hope of reward or karmic results. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you lack moral discipline, you cannot accomplish even your own purpose, so wanting to achieve the purpose of others is truly absurd. Therefore, protect your discipline without concern for worldly existence. This is the way of a bodhisattva. For bodhisattvas who desire a wealth of virtue, all harm is like a precious treasure. Therefore, without hostility, be patient with everyone. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Even hearers or solitary realizers who accomplish only their own purpose strive as if putting out a fire on their head. Seeing this, practice with diligence the source of good qualities for the sake of all beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Disturbing emotions are destroyed by insight grounded in calm abiding. Knowing this, cultivate meditative concentration that purely transcends the four formless absorptions. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Without wisdom, the other five perfections alone are not enough to reach complete enlightenment. Thus, combined with skillful means, develop the wisdom that does not distinguish among the three spheres. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Unless you examine your own confused ideas, you might look like a practitioner but not be acting like one. Therefore, always examine yourself and abandon confusion. This is the way of a bodhisattva. If you are driven by disturbing emotions and talk about another bodhisattva's faults, it's actually to your own detriment. So don't mention the faults of those who've entered the great vehicle. This is the way of a bodhisattva. Concern for gain and respect causes conflict, and a decline in words disturb others' minds and thus diminish the practice of a bodhisattva. Therefore, abandon harsh speech, which is unpleasant to others. This is the way of a bodhisattva. When disturbing emotions become habitual, it is difficult to reverse them with antidotes. Thus, the soldier of mindfulness wields antidotes as weapons and destroys disturbing emotions such as attachment the moment they start to arise. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In brief, wherever you are and whatever you are doing, always examine the state of your mind. Act to accomplish the purpose of others through constant mindfulness and awareness. This is the way of a bodhisattva. With the wisdom of threefold purity, dedicate all the virtue gained from having made such effort toward enlightenment. Dedicate it to clear away the suffering of infinite beings. This is the way of a bodhisattva. In accordance with the words of the holy ones regarding the meaning of the sutras, tantras, and their commentaries, I have written these 37 verses on the ways of a bodhisattva for those who wish to train on the bodhisattva's path. This composition will not be admired by the learned because my intellect is poor and my education is limited. However, I've followed the sutras and the words of holy ones, so I believe these ways of a bodhisattva are not mistaken. Still, because the vast deeds of bodhisattvas are difficult to grasp by single-minded beings like myself, I beg the forgiveness of the holy ones for the mass of my errors, such as contradictions and inconsistencies. By the virtue arising from this, may all beings give rise to relative and ultimate bodhicitta, and thereby come like the protector Chenrezig, who does not abide in the extremes of existence or peace. Go in. Go in. I've heard that when the Buddha was first teaching the monks, gathering Sangha, he sat one day, I don't know if I'm telling the story accurately, but the point will be accurate. He gathered the monks, and they were sitting on the ground, and it was dusty or sandy, and he drew a circle, kinds of suffering. And then he drew out on the periphery the causes, the 12 links of interdependent origination, what gives rise to form and therefore ultimately to suffering. And then in the center, the three creatures who represent passion, aggression, and ignorance. The Bhava Chakra, it's called, the wheel of existence. And at one point, some years after the Buddha did this, he asked that it be placed at the entry to every temple, this image. We have, I don't think we have one here, do we have? I've never actually seen the Bhava Chakra on its own here. Oh, it's around that corner? It's
Garchen placed
It's exactly as the Buddha requested. Thank you. And so I was entering a long retreat. It didn't turn out to be as long as I thought it was. It was intended to be a lifelong retreat, but it didn't last quite that long. And a friend brought me from India, before I went into this retreat, a little cloth, a little saffron-colored, very rough fabric. It wasn't an elegant piece of art, but it was the Bhava Chakra on this little piece of cloth. And I put it on my table. At that point, I could sit on the cushion, and I had a little table like this it was made out of a milk crate. That I'd been using it for a very long time, so it was really my puja table, and I laid that little cloth on it. And every day I saw the realms of sentient beings and the specific graphic depiction of the kinds of sufferings that occur in each of the realms, and contemplated through the power of imaginative sympathy or sympathetic imagination in sequence every day the sufferings. I entered each of those realms through our imaginative capacity that we have, so that I could experience with and learn from. I have to tell you, it broke my heart. It was such a simple practice. It was just, how you lean on your little table when you're practicing. So I was literally relying on these realms and the beings in the realms and their sufferings for my learning, for some little bit of compassion to emerge in my heart, and for some understanding to penetrate the darkness of my mind, to understand what it means to have the precious human lifetime. And sometimes I would lean on the puja table on that cloth in order to get up from the seat, because if you're sitting for like 4 or 5 hours without moving, sometimes it's hard to get into motion again. And I felt I write about this in detail in the book that will come out, and at the end I said that I was in that retreat relying on all beings for my own liberation, really, for what I could learn from taking part with them in their sufferings. And when I experienced the broken heart of true compassion, it's the heart that has broken open. And I remember as all of that came to an end, finite number of months. I remember thinking, all this time I've been relying on you for my liberation. When I leave here from now on, all of you, I promise that you can rely on me for your liberation. That was when the Bodhisattva aspiration really became specific and very focused and implacable. There is no way for that aspiration not to be animating this mind now, and it's because I relied on all sentient beings. I gave up my thought that, there was a deus ex machina that was going to descend from heaven, and suddenly I would be lifted into the enlightenment state. It doesn't work like that. So I wanted to share that with you because I want to speak again about aspiration. My faithful attendant last night asked some question. I have to confess, my faithful attendant and I did not maintain silence the 2 evenings. He comes to protect me from the ghoulies and the ghosties and the long-leggedy beasties and the things that go bump in the night. So he's sleeping in Tashi House also. Very nice, because did you hear something go bump in the night? There was a really big bump in the night, so I was very glad you were there. So basically we had a little pajama party and sat up and talked for a couple of hours. And I don't remember what the question was that you asked, but the answer was aspiration. Do you remember the question?
The difference
Really? Well, that might change what I talk about. You know, at my age, it's likely that it's my memory that's faulty. Let's see. I remember it slightly differently. You know how a good interview subject changes it responds to whatever question is asked by responding with what they want to talk about. So that's what I'll do. We'll just use this slight taking off point. So I'll just wipe my tears away for a moment here. So I think the way I understood the question, however it was framed last night, was how do you go from Bodhisattva to Buddha? Do you think that was implicit, maybe? And the answer was aspiration. And so I don't know whether it's been evident here, but I talk about aspiration all the time. Motivation is everything in the Dharma. You know, I say that all the time. Well, that points to aspiration. Huh? What we want for ourselves may arise from desire. And desire can be pure or can be compounded with self-interest, yes? There comes a point when your wanting for yourself is shattered by what I described as this experience with the bhava chakra. Something like that can happen to each of us on the path at a certain point. And if it doesn't happen, well, I think until it happens, until the heart really until you're broken-hearted, Bodhisattva, the suffering of the samsaric existence can't really penetrate your consciousness, and the unbounded compassion and love of the Bodhisattva can't really flow freely out. There has to be, the carapace around the heart has to be broken. And it's broken by understanding the nature of suffering. But I think it's also broken by understanding our longing. Whenever I'm talking about longing, I'm also talking about aspiration. The two are really deeply intertwined. So at some point, remember I said, pay attention to your longing. That is your divine dissatisfaction. You know, it's the communication from your place of deepest knowing that you are the separation, the sense of separation you experience from truth or love is illusory. There has never been separation. There is no such thing as separation. Even in the material world, there is no separation. You really can't see, we can't see molecules moving with our vision, but you wouldn't know if you could. It would be hard to discern where the mic ended and the mouth began. Yes? All matter is actually motion. Vibration and motion, yes? I am not a physicist, so if I'm making this up, sorry, but it made the point. So, aspiration is, you can use it in the mundane sense and say, I aspire to go to, Mongolia and ride horses. That you could say that's an aspiration, but in the way I use aspiration and the way we use aspiration in the Buddha Dharma, it's really your potent, implacable love and compassion for all beings that gives you the aspiration to awaken yourself, that you may become a liberator of all. That's aspiration. Where even your initial desire for enlightenment, the E word, or awakening or liberation, however we want to call it, even the early desire that might make you long for relief from your own suffering is a noble desire. Even though it's about the self, really any diminution in our confusion lightens the load for us all. So offer even the smallest cheeks in your armor where a little more light is coming through, where your
becoming more peaceful, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in the next verse of the Paramitas, where you're becoming a little more peaceful and more stable, a little less disordered. The mind is beginning to feel a little bit more pliant and responsive to your intention. Even if that motivation for that is that you be free of suffering, that you no longer be tormented by desire and anger and confusion, that is still a noble intention. So don't put it down if that's where you are. We start there. Unless we know what suffering is, it's not of interest to us that other people are experiencing it or other beings are experiencing it. So to be aware of your own suffering and seek release from that is, for many of us, the first step on the path. So it's a sacred step. Right? So give thanks that you have enough suffering to awaken you to desire to be free of it. Even if that's as far as you get in this lifetime, that's farther than you probably got the last time. I don't know, I'm making that up. But that sense of gratitude for suffering will help you a great deal in the course of your work on the path. When suffering becomes your friend because it gives rise to aspiration for you, you'll recognize it always as something that is beneficial for you to experience. And you want to help others be free of it until they come to the point also where they can recognize it as one of the stepping stones that they're taking on their path. And then you're all together blessing suffering also. So that I refer to as sacred suffering. Sacred suffering. Remember I said, I think it was yesterday, I think either everything is sacred or nothing is. So with the great love, we see even our suffering as sacred. And I remember Rinpoche at one point saying, never interfere with the karma of another being. That's a very hard one for somebody who wants to help beings to get the mind around, and I don't think I completely understand it. At least I'm sure I don't completely understand it. But I do experience my own suffering as karmic purification, as the flowering and therefore the dissolution of karmic cause that I've said in the past. And so I have a different view of other people's suffering too. I love you and I don't want you to be in pain, and I regret that there's difficulty, but yay. Because if it's karmic purification for me, it is also certainly karmic purification for thee. So I will want to help in any way I can when I see a suffering being, but yay. Purification is not a bed of roses. Oh yes, it is. The thorny part. But the fragrance of purification is exquisite. It's exquisite. It's like attar of rose. Have you ever heard of Paramahansa Yogananda? A great yogi? A disciple of his came to do a solitary retreat in the community I was in for 20 years, and we had a mountain up behind us, just as you're supposed to. You're supposed to have a mountain behind you. And he went up the mountain for his quest, for his vision quest. And for him it was solitary retreat. It wasn't in the native form. And when he came down 4 days later, I saw his face in the sky. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever had it? I saw his face in the sky while he was practicing. And so I had a thought he was maybe doing a really good retreat. And he came down from his retreat, and he had to walk past the door of my room in order to go down the hallway to where he was staying. And the fragrance of roses followed him. That was a momentary corrective for me to my extreme arrogance. because that's not the fragrance that follows me down the hall, I'm quite sure. Anyway, I like to share these stories with you because it's a way of, when I die, all of these experiences that are sacred and cherished in my mind will be gone. They'll all be gone. So I'm pouring them out. I want some of them to continue because they're so inspiring. That to me was a very inspiring moment. It said something to me. This is the power of pure intention and practice. Because the Attar of Roses was not following behind him when he climbed that mountain. It was when he came down. Play with the Dharma, my friends. Play. So aspiration lifts us from the wanting for ourselves of relief or enlightenment or attar of roses. The aspiration is what has the power to penetrate and shatter the ceiling under which we are content to live as suffering beings. We're content to flail and thrash around under this canopy that we live under. This is just an image that I work with that I find very helpful. We don't even know it's there. We don't even know that there's a canopy over us or a ceiling. But when it shatters, we know there has been one. When we penetrate it and rise through it with our awareness meeting awareness, we know there has been a canopy above us under which we were living. Aspiration will take us through that ceiling, that canopy. Garchen Rinpoche says you will attain the ultimate realization. You will attain the ultimate realization only if your whole heart and mind are longing for that. Only if. You can, having written the word only, please underline it. Only if you long for ultimate realization for the benefit of all beings, only then will you attain that. So I invite you, my dear Dharma friends, to kindle your aspiration the way you would kindle a fire to survive in the Arctic night, although that may be changing. But the image is still good. Yeah. Every day, kindle your aspiration to fully awaken in order to become a liberator of beings. Every single day. That's the first corner of the sacred frame for your day. And the ending of the day, review the day in relation to that aspiration and clear intention, and see where you have been in alignment with it in your actions of body, speech, and mind in the course of that day. Remember the aspiration that you frame at the beginning and see how your day has aligned with that purpose. And take note and acknowledge and give thanks that you were able to be in alignment with your ultimate purpose in the course of a finite, very relative day. Yeah? And it's a very quick review. You don't sit there for 15 minutes and write sentences about it. You just look within, as we're learning how to do. Just cast the gaze within with that inward attention, asking that question, and you'll see. You only have to see one element. You don't have to see the whole thing. And then you do the same with the other question, which naturally follows. Where in the course of this day have I not been in body, speech, and mind aligned with my ultimate purpose? And then again, with the inward attention, just cast that inner gaze within and note what is shown you. And then, and this is a very powerful step, which we might not really believe in. We don't have to believe in it, but I suggest that you practice it to see what happens. When you see what has not been in alignment with your ultimate purpose, re-spool that thread and replay it so that the actions of body, speech, and mind that were not aligned come into alignment. So you rerun the film for that segment, and it rewrites the synaptic pathways in your brain. So what your brain is then training in is alignment, not misalignment. Yeah? And then you go to sleep, and the memory bank has stored alignment with your ultimate purpose. I have a handout for you with this. Yeah. Please remind me to put it out. Deal? Practice this for 21 days, if you will, morning and night, and just note how you're doing, how you are, how you feel. Note how the day looks. Just note. Right? For any new practice like this, for the mind, a 21-day period, 3 or 7 or 21-day period of practice is excellent. But you're strong practitioners, so 21 is good. You can start with 3 if you have self-doubt, like most humans, but if you start with 3 and then you feel it's not working out too well, review the instructions that are on paper, and then go back and do 7. You can creep up to 21 if you don't feel confident. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say about aspiration. And then I want to speak a little bit about, I'm revisiting some of the things we talked about a little bit. I might even read you the more accurate version of the 2 refutations, if I can find it. So this is me respinning the story to touch on some things I didn't touch on in quite the way I wanted or sufficiently. We talked just a little bit about, we touched a little bit about some of the things that are in verse 6, the relationship with the spiritual teacher, but we talked about that in much more depth the last retreat, and I didn't want to go back into that in that kind of depth, but I want to talk about devotion a little bit. Thank you, Nukam, for everything. My experience when I first came into Sangha, where there was a spiritual teacher, was in seeing people exhibiting the signs of devotion or doing the, bowing and so on. I sort of, what is this? I wasn't brought up to bow to people, or to bow to anything, actually. And Americans meeting, or maybe Westerners in general, but this is the consciousness that I'm most aware of, is the consciousness of this particular part of the world. There's a strong kind of strong current of individualism and autonomy. We're really quite committed to those values, and of egalitarianism, which is not the same thing as seeing the equality of all beings. When you encounter the word equanimity and equality in the Dharma, it refers to Buddha nature. When we talk about egalitarianism, we're really talking about leveling the playing field in some ways, you know? So I really acknowledge I didn't have a clue what devotion meant for a spiritual practitioner in relation to a teacher. I really had to start from below scratch. And it was a rocky road for me. And I threw a few rocks in front of my teacher, too, on that road. Not at her, I didn't mean that, but it was a rock. It became, it was difficult, it was challenging. So I have had to really think about devotion. I've had to observe devotion. I've had to kind of plumb my own ignorance about it. And the point of change for me came when I was no longer trying to be devoted to the teacher, but with the arising of the Bodhisattva aspiration in my own mind and consciousness, I became aware that I and the teacher had devotion to the same intention, that we had mutually shared devotion to the same aspiration, the liberation of all beings from suffering. And at that moment, my devotion with that teacher began to really flower, because we were arms linked to free all beings from suffering. And I understand that now as a very significant inflection point on the Bodhisattva path. We tend to see ourselves as different in some fundamental way from the teacher, and so for a long time we may be focused like this on the teacher, right? We need at some point to let the gaze widen so that we're not only seeing the teacher, we're also seeing what the teacher is seeing. And we're not, the old, I don't know how old it is, but there's a saying that, maybe I said this already when we were speaking earlier, but the teacher is pointing to the ultimate, and the disciple is admiring the finger. We need to look where the teacher is pointing. And then we need to see how the teacher walks in that direction. Yeah? To me, this is the deeper symbolism of the pair of sandals or the shoes of the teacher that are reverenced by the disciples. It's not just because the lotus feet of the teacher have been in those sandals. It's because those sandals are the walk that the teacher's taking on the path. That's how the teacher's walking. We need to follow the direction the teacher's pointing, the example of how the teacher's walking, and our devotion will become boundless. Boundless. Effortlessly. Let our devotion to the teacher, the teachings, and the Sangha become our inspiration, not in any way a closed box in which we want to remain somehow slavishly oriented to admiration, but an open door to follow where those who inspire us are walking. Their footsteps are still warm. The prints, where they've placed their feet, they're still warm, they're radiant. Let's walk there. Do you remember good King Wenceslas? The line where it talks about the heat of the, I can't remember the exact words, but that's the first time I ever heard that the disciple follows King Wenceslas out into the snow to bring food to a starving family, I think it was, something like that. And the king's beautiful intention to save this family from suffering, going out literally into a terrible winter storm, the faithful attendant walked behind because the king wanted him to have shelter and not to be the one who walked first breaking the snow for the king, but to walk in the pathway that the king was making so that the faithful attendant would be warm and safe. And the warmth of the king's footsteps was what was referred to in the verse. You know, in any tradition, we're going to find the teachings that we need if we're looking for them. They're there. Truth will always be voiced by sincere adherents, by sincere practitioners. So that's about devotion and aspiration. So that shared aspiration, to share that aspiration with the teacher, is to share the burden. Oh, precious bane, let me share the burden. Bane means burden. It's an old English word. Yeah. Let me share the burden. I find that deeply inspiring, inspiriting, the sense that I am sharing with Garchen Rinpoche and with my other teachers to whom I have devotion, with whom I share that I can lift my share of the weight of suffering, and I can offer my share of the liberating love. And this is within our capacity. Whatever level we are as students and practitioners, this is within our capacity, because we're only saying, let me do my share. We're not saying, let me take yours entirely from you. How would that be of benefit? That wouldn't even work. We can't take someone else's part and perform it for them, but we can take our part and perform it with them. We're all in this together, yeah? We've co-created this material existence that we find ourselves caught in and also delighting in. And together we, as Sangha, this is really a deeper understanding of Sangha. Together we share with all of our exemplars, our instructors, our mentors, our teacher friends, our spiritual friends, and our holy gurus, and their antecedents, those we take profound inspiration from because we're in their line and receiving their blessings. We've never met them in person as far as we know, at least not in this lifetime, but we're not separate from them at all. For example, the holy Longchenpa, I don't know if any of you know Longchenpa, and of course Milarepa, their teachings are alive. They're alive, they're living. Rinpoche said something to me extraordinary once, and I don't understand it. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to ask him exactly how that works. I was telling him that I just couldn't continue with this book I was writing on the 37 Bodhisattva practices, that I just wasn't qualified. I had not the depth of understanding, and I was no scholar, and so on and so forth. And poor pitiful me can't possibly do it. And he just, he fixed me again with that eye. And he said, Barbara, when he's going to say something really sharp, he prefaces it with Barbara. He said, if you have the Dharma and you don't give it, that is self-grasping. And that's all a Bodhisattva needs to hear. So, of course, I finished the book. But there's some reason I was telling you about this. What was it? When I get off into stories about Rinpoche, I kind of lose track of whatever it was I was wanting to speak to. Oh, yes. So, in that same conversation, he was speaking about what he wanted me to be doing as a, at this stage of my life as a Dharma teacher, and I said, yes, I do want to continue to teach as much as I can, and we both acknowledge that there might be some limitations as age, progresses, and I said, and that's one of the reasons I'm writing, because it will reach more people. I reach very small numbers of people, because my preference has always been to go as deep as possible, and sometimes that's easier with a smaller group, although I'm not convinced I'm right about that. But anyway, I said, yes, that's one of the reasons I write. And he did. He didn't say Barbara this time. He just looked at me again. He said, our words will continue. Our words will continue. And I thought, was he saying, so you don't need to write, get out there, talk to people. I felt as if that was perhaps what he was saying. I don't know. I'll ask him if I ever have the opportunity. But it made me think of Milarepa, whose words continue. It made me think of Longchenpa, whose words continue. And not just because they're written down, they continued for a very long time before they were written down. And the Buddha's words also, and the words of Jesus, and other great teachers, they were oral traditions. The words continued, and then they were written down. Maybe they weren't exactly accurate completely, but the sense of them is still strong. It's still alive, of these great teachers. So remember that when you hear and receive teachings that have come down through the lineages, whatever tradition you're in, remember that these are living words, and that the teacher's wisdom is still alive. The words are animated by that wisdom, and as they enter you, they take on new life. And then you can carry them forward. And then to the degree that you're also a teacher, in whatever way that may be, as we talked about, the highest form of generosity is to give Dharma, what truth you yourself have, to share with others, then know that when you speak words of truth and love, those words will continue. Okay? Okay then. Anybody need to take a quick bathroom break before we start, we finish with the paramitas? I do. So, any of you who feel like following in the path of the teacher, this is a good opportunity to practice that. Where is the platter that